I will promise you this, that if we have not gotten our troops out by the time I am president, it is the first thing I will do. I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war. You can take that to the bank.
We're spooling back to 2014, when the US was about to withdraw most of its troops from Afghanistan. 3 years on, the US drawdown has stalled. There are still almost 9,000 military personnel in the country.
I will promise you this, that if we have not gotten our troops out by the time I am president, it is the first thing I will do. I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war. You can take that to the bank.
And the fact is that I opposed this war from the start. So you were about 4.5 years late.
And I spoke out strongly in opposition to war. Nearly all of my opponents for the Democratic nomination for president made a different choice and voted to authorize war. But the reason I talk about it is because I truly believe that the judgment and the conviction and the accountability that each of us showed on the most important foreign policy issue of a generation is the best indicator you have about how each of us will make those decisions going forward. I think the problem isn't just how we fought the war, it's that we fought the war in the first place. This isn't just a problem of execution, it is a problem of conception.
President Barack Obama, and he says, quote, "If the Iraqi forces require further training and further support, we shall examine this then," it's talking about 2011, at that time, based on the needs of Iraq. So he's already, of course, just laying the propaganda path out there for the U.S. Occupation to continue unabated. You know, my contacts in Iraq are saying patrols are still happening in Baghdad, patrols are still happening in other cities. Some of the bigger bases, like the one in Baghdad, are still right there. We're still looking at over 130,000 U.S. troops there, and more flowing into Afghanistan. So we're really, again, we're just seeing a continuation of Bush policy in both Iraq and Afghanistan.
But isn't this classic corporate doublespeak or soft power where Obama always, instead of Bush is saying, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want, Obama will say, you have won. I won't hire lobbyists, or you have won. I'll pull out of Iraq, or you have won. I won't give banker bailout bonus money, or and then he does the exact opposite. I mean, he's a lot slicker because he doesn't give you a fight. He tells you, okay, I agree with you, but then goes around behind your back. I mean,
let there be no doubt, I will end this war. Let there be no doubt, I will end this war. Let there be no doubt, I will end this war.
Where, you know, hey, you voted for him and he says he's going to change everything, and just because he's more charismatic and articulate and can actually complete sentences unlike Bush, people believe him. You know, Barack Obama, for example, just talking about Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to see that he kept Bush's Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. He kept all the highest-ranking people in the Pentagon there from Bush to just continue over. I mean, there's been a seamless continuation in policy. And we're not even talking about domestically, but just talking about foreign policy and the U.S. empire abroad, we're looking at this continue unabated. You know, we're still running on the 2006 national security strategy, of course, which was revised under Bush.
They don't want leaders who bog us down in unnecessary wars. They don't want leaders who allow America to lose its moral standing. They don't want leaders who tell the American people anything less than the full truth about where they stand and what they'll do. That is the big part of what this campaign is about. I think the American people have had enough of politicians who go out of their way to look tough, who say one thing in caucus and another in a general election.
Most of the foreign policy commentators that have questioned our policies would go headlong into a bunch of military adventures that the American people have no interest in participating in and would not advance our core security interests. So if you look at Syria, for example, our interest is in helping the Syrian people, but nobody suggests that us being involved in a land war in Syria would necessarily accomplish this goal. And I would note that those who criticize our foreign policy with respect to Syria, they themselves say, no, we don't mean sending in troops. Well, what do you mean? Well, you should be assisting the opposition. Well, we're assisting the opposition. What else do you mean? Well, perhaps you should have taken a strike in Syria to get chemical weapons out of Syria. Well, it turns out we're getting chemical weapons out of Syria without having initiated a strike. So what else are you talking about?
We will move forward with our plan supported by bipartisan majorities in Congress to ramp up our effort to train and equip the Syrian opposition, who are the best counterweight to ISIL and the Assad regime.
وما يعطونا سلاح الا اللي عم يحارب داعش حصريا. احنا مو انه عم يعطونا مشان حرب بشار مشان حرب داعش.
You're now striking even the Syrians. The FSA are being targeted now by those airstrikes. And people think that no, they're not targeting those people, they're targeting ISIS. That's not true.
Here's my question for every member of Congress and every member of the global community. What message will we send if a dictator can gas hundreds of children to death in plain sight and pay no price? What's the purpose of the international system that we've built if a prohibition on the use of chemical weapons that has been agreed to by the governments of 98% of the world's people and approved overwhelmingly by the Congress of the United States is not enforced? I have the authority to carry out this military action without specific congressional authorization. The point is that for some reason, many who were proponents of what I consider to be a disastrous decision to go into Iraq haven't really learned the lesson of the last decade. And they keep on just playing the same note over and over again. Why? I don't know. But we can continue to speak out clearly about what we believe.
And we were counseled by some of the most experienced voices in Washington that the only way for Democrats to look tough was to talk and act and vote like Republicans.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
I'm aware that there's still some who would question or even justify the offense of 9/11. But let us be clear. Al-Qaeda killed nearly 3,000 people on that day. The victims were innocent men, women, and children from America and many other nations who had done nothing to harm anybody. And yet Al-Qaeda chose to ruthlessly murder these people, claimed credit for the attack, and even now states their determination to kill on a massive scale. They have affiliates in many countries and are trying to expand their reach. These are not opinions to be debated. These are facts to be dealt with.
Leading Democrats, including one of my opponents, Senator Clinton, echoed the erroneous line that there was a connection between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. And we were counseled by some of the most experienced voices in Washington that the only way for Democrats to look tough was to talk and act and vote like Republicans.
These are not opinions to be debated. These are facts to be dealt with.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
The conventional thinking says that Democrats can't win elections unless they talk and act and vote like the Bush administration has suggested when it comes to foreign policy and national security. But understand this, I'm not running to conform to Washington's conventional thinking. I'm running to challenge it. That's what I did in 2002, that's what I did in 2004, and that's what I will do as President of the United States. Why is this amendment so dangerous? Because George Bush and Dick Cheney could use this language to justify keeping our troops in Iraq as long as they can point to a threat from Iran. And because they could use this language to justify an attack on Iran as part of the ongoing war in Iraq. I don't want to give this president any excuse or any opening for war. Because as we've learned with the authorization of the Iraq War, when you give this president a blank check, you can't be surprised when he decides to cash it, as when I stood up in Iowa on September 12th and said, George Bush and Dick Cheney must hear loud and clear from the American people and the Congress, you do not have our support and you do not have our authorization for another war. He won't be able to say that we really agree about using the war in Iraq to justify military action against Iran.
I've ordered the prison at Guantanamo Bay closed by early next year.
Make no mistake, we will close Guantanamo prison. I still want to close Guantanamo.
As president, I have tried to close Gitmo. I will continue to push to close Gitmo. It's time to close Gitmo.
Guantanamo, that's easy. Close down Guantanamo, restore habeas corpus, say no to renditions, no to wireless wiretaps.
As president, I'll immediately implement country of origin labeling because Americans should know where their food comes from. We'll let folks know whether their food has been genetically modified because Americans should know what they're buying.
Every time I speak about my hope for America, the cynics in Washington roll their eyes. You see, they don't believe we can actually change politics and bring an end to decades of division and deadlock. They don't believe we can limit the power of lobbyists who block our progress, or that we can trust the American people with the truth. And that's why we face the same problems and hear the same promises every 4 years. This is Barack Obama. I approved this message to ask you to believe, not just in my ability to bring about real change in Washington. I'm asking you to believe in yours.
These are distractions that confuse and sucker good people, and not only in the United States, I can assure you. I write for the Italian socialist newspaper Il Manifesto, or rather I used to write for it. In February, I sent the editor an article which raised questions about Obama as a progressive force. The article was rejected. In other words, an American president drafted to promote the most rapacious system in history is ordained and depoliticized by important sections of the left. It's a remarkable situation. The struggle of people against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. We should never forget that the primary goal of great power is to distract and limit our natural desire for social justice. The American populace were far from perfect, but they often spoke for ordinary people, and they were betrayed by leaders who urged them to compromise and merge with the Democratic Party. That was long ago, but how familiar it sounds. Americans are trained to deny their imperialism. Americanism is an ideology that is unique because its main feature is its denial that it is an ideology. It's both conservative and it's liberal, and it's right and it's left. And Barack Obama is its embodiment. Columnist Mark Morford wrote, and I quote, "Spiritually advanced people regard the new president as a light worker who can help usher in a new way of being on the planet," unquote. Tell that to an Afghan child whose family has been blown away by Obama's bombs.
Even greater cooperation and understanding between nations. We will begin to responsibly leave Iraq to its people and forge a hard-earned peace in Afghanistan.
With the idea that he needs to rely on the authorization for the use of military force, which was passed in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. Only Barbara Lee voted against it in either house. He now is claiming something that is the wet dream of Cheney and Rumsfeld, which is that Article 2 of the Constitution, the Commander-in-Chief Clause, gives him carte blanche to do all of these things. Obama campaigned on the idea that he was going to stop dumb wars, and the first thing he did was to surge in Afghanistan, expand the role of Special Operations Forces. We have 250 special operators now on the ground.
Obama lied that America had gone to Iraq to bring freedom to that country. He announced that the troops were coming home. This was another deception. The head of the Army, General George Casey, says with some authority that America will be in Iraq for up to a decade. Other generals say 15 years. President Obama, he wrote, does one thing and brand Obama gets you to believe another. This is the essence of successful advertising. You buy or do what the advertiser wants because of how they make you feel.
They don't want leaders who bog us down in unnecessary wars. They don't want leaders who allow America to lose its moral standing. They don't want leaders who tell the American people anything less than the full truth about where they stand and what they'll do. That is the big part of what this campaign is about.
I will promise you this, that if we have not gotten our troops out by the time I am president, it is the first thing I will do. I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war. You can take that to the bank.
We've been wondering now for about a week, what is the United States going to do when it comes to Iraq? A number of trial balloons have been floated by people like John Kerry, representatives of the Pentagon. Will we ally with Iran? Will we send in troops? Will we just do airstrikes? That's going to continue for a while. But we do know a little bit now, thanks to President Barack Obama giving a press conference about the situation in Iraq. We've got several videos. Here's the first.
As I said last week, ISIL poses a threat to the Iraqi people, to the region, and to U.S. interests. So today I want to provide you an update on how we're responding to the situation. And through our new Counterterrorism Partnership Fund, we're prepared to work with Congress to provide additional equipment. We have had advisors in Iraq through our embassy, and we're prepared to send a small number of additional American military advisors, up to 300, to assess how we can best train, advise, and support Iraqi security forces going forward. American forces will not be returning to combat in Iraq, but we will help Iraqi. They take the fight to terrorists who threaten the Iraqi people, the region, and American interests as well.
So there's a lot in that first video, a little bit of wordplay. We're going to send these 300 troops. Troops will not be returning to Iraq, as we're sending the 300, and might be sending special forces as well soon.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the English language as well as Barack Obama does, but if they're returning to Iraq, they're returning to Iraq. Yeah. That's kind of what's happening. That's the definition of returning.
Yeah. During his brief period in the Senate, Obama voted to continue the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He voted for the Patriot Act. He refused to support a bill for single-payer health care. He supported the death penalty. As a presidential candidate, he received more corporate backing than John McCain. He promised to close Guantanamo as a priority, but instead he's excused torture, reinstated military commissions, kept the Bush gulag intact, and opposed habeas corpus.
FAIR TV does a good job exposing how the media suppresses Obama's warmongering, how he actually increased the amount of troops in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the mainstream media suppresses that fact and misrepresents Obama as some guy striving to wind down these wars, suppressing the fact that he escalated the war in Afghanistan and he prolonged for years these two totally unnecessary wars. So please check out this FAIR TV clip.
Hi, welcome back to FAIR TV. I'm Peter Hart. Barack Obama's May 27th announcement of a timeline for troop withdrawals from Afghanistan was big news. But the general tone of the coverage of a White House ending the war often neglected to mention Obama's massive escalation of the war. On NPR's Morning Edition, Scott Horsley told listeners that there were 32,000 troops in Afghanistan, and then he added this.
This is Obama's fourth visit to Afghanistan as president and his first since 2012. Since that time, U.S. troop levels here have been cut by about 2/3.
But that's an oddly narrow view of Obama's Afghan war policies. When he took office in 2009, there were about 32,000 troops in Afghanistan. He ordered 2 surges of U.S. forces. Troop levels eventually totaled over 100,000. For whatever reason, this escalation is often written out of the history of the Afghan war. The AP reported, for instance, that Obama's efforts to pull the U.S. out of the lengthy and expensive conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan have largely defined his foreign policy for much of his presidency. And the Washington Post referred to Obama's address at West Point coming more than 6 years into a presidency devoted to winding down the wars. If one winds down a war by first escalating it, then this makes perfect sense.
My primary message today is going to be to reject pessimism and cynicism.
As part of the reason I'm running is I'm impatient with the status quo. And what we've seen out of Democrats and Republicans, what we've seen from Democrats and Republicans is a certain willingness to tolerate what I consider to be an intolerable status quo.
I hear candidates saying, elect me because I've been in Washington a long time, I know how to play the game better. We don't need somebody who knows how to play the game better. We need somebody to put an end to the game playing. That's what we need in America right now. Somebody who's going to be straightforward and honest.
Unless we stand up to the corporate lobbyists that have stood in the way of progress, unless we have leadership that doesn't just tell people what we think people want to hear, but tells everyone what they need to know, that's the change that we need. I think you deserve a president who you can trust,